Hey guys, it's Alex. So today we're going to do another podcast episode. Going to just focus on the mental game. So no video, nothing like that. Sit back, think deep, and hopefully I can impart something upon you, which has been kind of the theme of 2022, something that's chased us around and come up again and again as we've taught clinics, sat by fires, just been in the community. So this year, distinct memory of coming back to the Moose Put-In to camp for the night and finding a crew from out of town who had just had a pretty rough time of it. I remember a bunch of people nursing injuries, dude in the corner who was pretty much curled in the fetal position. I think he had a concussion from crashing alpine line. And the conversation over the evening came to, how do you pick a line? How do you know what you're going to run every day? How do you interpret based on what's happened earlier in the day what you're going to do later? My response to that question was, I have my lines and I run my lines. And if I crash one, I keep doing my job. I'm just clocking in, doing what I'm supposed to do. And that's how I build consistency. And that's how we approach things in our crew. And that was kind of shocking for a couple people. Many look at other people's lines when they're scouting, and if it doesn't go well for someone else, that influences their day in a way. At some point, this is an individual sport, and you have to learn that resiliency, that mental hardness, that tenacity to become a honey badger and to bulldog your way through situations. So tenacity is going to be our theme today. When you're learning to paddle, it's very common that you are focusing on individual skills. Your forward stroke, your eddy turns, your ferries, whatever it might be. And often you're linking those together on easier sections, building up, going harder and harder. One of the things that gets lost in this practice is building the ability to react to things going wrong and working on becoming mentally tough as well. At some point, when all of that skill training does pay off, you are probably going to be running things with actual consequences. That's the definition of class 4 and 5, right? And at some point, especially if you're running class 5, that means that by definition, you're going to come real up and close and personal and interact with some of those things which are dangerous and scary and have a lot of opportunities for the unknown, for failure, for things that are outside of your control. The first part of approaching those situations is accepting on some level that if you do things, there's a saying that if you do things a million times, you will eventually experience what appears to be a miracle. That statistically, the most unlikely outcomes will eventually come to pass. And that's something which we accepted a long time ago. If you run things enough times, every possible outcome will eventually present itself to you. Even if you think you have the smallest thing dialed, sometimes that's the best opportunity for it to reach up and bite you. So the best way that we stay honed, stay sharp, and stay on top of our game is by constantly finding opportunities to practice the small things. That gives us the confidence to use them in the clutch and the ability to accurately judge what our capabilities are so that when we're scouting, we know the things that we can be confident about and we know the things that are going to be challenging. If you know the things that are going to require attention, that you're really going to have to be dialed in for, and you know the places where you're going to be able to take a bit of a breath and prepare yourself for what's coming next, that inherently makes things more manageable. That is going to give you the time to stay calm, cool, and collected, and it also begins to give you places in that rapid where you know that you have opportunities for recovery. The second aspect of drilling, making mistakes in places without a lot of consequence, where you're going to have to still make some sort of recovery and think quickly on your feet, is that in itself is a skill that you need to build. You need to take the opportunities to play when there are places to play, to try things which have a potential for failure so that you can experience failure and that you can get good at dealing with it. That's the best way to become hardened, is to go up against something which is going to mold you and shape you and take off your rough edges. Being able to take out a silly boat and get smacked down in class 3 and have to dig yourself out of a spot means that when you're in class 5 in a creek boat and you get smacked down, you're not going to panic. You're going to be able to keep calmer longer. And often it is just the difference of half a second that is the situation working itself out. It's a difference of the hole spitting you out, of the momentary pin letting go, whatever it might be. Or it's just a difference between reaching and pulling your skirt and trying the next roll. The biggest difference when you go in and are running difficult rapids where you are forced to come out in a certain place or do a certain move, meaning class 4, class 5, is that there aren't alternatives. So one of the best lessons that you can learn off the bat and stick with is that when you make a plan, is that plan flexible or is it not? And if it's not flexible, learning how to stay focused. If you can stay focused on what you need to do, often it really helps your mind's tendency to try and go into fight or flight, to panic. By giving it a job, by giving yourself a task that you need to singularly focus on, you can take out a lot of the distractions. You can focus on what you need to do instead of the things that are scaring you. That trick is one of the best ways that I can stay in the boat longer, that I can miss something, piton, and get back online. Getting back online has to be your first, last, and only priority when things go wrong. And that's the best way to dig yourself out of a bad situation. A great example of this happened a couple months ago. Hannah was stepping up to try a line that is pretty intimidating. And she was doing it in a boat that she didn't know well. It was a gutsy decision. And it didn't pay off. She got screwed up. She found herself trying to salvage going around a big sieve, and she got stuffed in a hole and it popped her skirt. She was still only halfway down the rapid, and she looked up and started screaming to me that her skirt was popped and she was flooded with water and she didn't know what to do. And I screamed back the only thing that she could do, which was to paddle out. And in that moment, when it clicked for her that there were no alternatives, there were no last chance eddies, there was nothing to do, she sprung up, dug deep, went out there, and pulled a boof in a boat completely full of water. She rose to the occasion and did something that I don't know if she knew she was capable of. While those aren't the moments that you're looking for when you pack up to go to the river, those are the moments where you really are growing as a paddler and as a human being. Those are the moments that make us out there on the river. But what happens when these aren't success stories? What happens when they don't go our way? Well, that's life. One of the most special parts of paddling is that no one is born a talented whitewater kayaker. There's no way to get better besides seat time. And the people who are going to progress the fastest and reach highest levels are the ones who are willing to accept failure, accept a job, and go out and perform. I call it clocking in. I can't tell you how many times I've been above something that scared me, that a 45% of me didn't want to do, but that the rest of me knew that by going out there and just delivering on my basics, paddling within my abilities, everything was going to go not only well, but I was going to stomp it. But because I didn't have the confidence, it was a personal, emotional struggle to go out there and hit that thing. Some days you're just not feeling sendy. Those are the most important days to go out there and deliver anyway. And the reason is those are the days that you have something to prove to yourself. Every time I feel that way, I try to dig deeper and rise higher to the occasion. Because if I don't, I know that I'm going to start slipping and I'm going to lose it at the point at which I don't keep finding it within myself to go out there. That doesn't mean I'm out to set any world records. That doesn't mean I'm out to be better than anyone else. That just means that I am going to continue pushing to make sure that I'm reaching the level of performance, the level of excellence that I set for myself. And I'm going to go out there and meet my goals. By not challenging myself, by not holding myself to a baseline, by not jumping back on the horse when I crash, that starts to slip away. One of the things that I think really surprised people who came out to the clinics this year is that we forced repetition. Very often, we took people who were in over their heads, or at least they thought they were, and got them just down a waterfall or a rapid their first time. We just had them survive it. And they would look up with a sense of relief and say, "Oh, thank God that's over." What they didn't understand was that we were going to go make them run it 3 more times. We weren't going anywhere. By doing that, the first one we would take the edge off. The second one, we would start to work on the skills required to do a harder move or to really nail that move. And then by the third and the fourth, we were just beating it into them, polishing everything off on that feature to make sure that they never forgot what they were capable of. That method is something I would encourage to you. If you have somewhere where you can go and just work on a boof that's scaring you, a scary ferry, even if it means walking laps, do it. It's worth it. Other sports like rock climbing, people have project routes. People have individual features that they're sessioning to get better and better. In freestyle, we'll go out there and spend a session working on a move that we're bad at. In river running and creeking, it's important to find opportunities to use that same technique. There are only so many fundamental skills that you need in paddling. What's really important is your ability to trust them more and more. That's what's going to open up doors for you more than anything else will. That's what's going to allow you to trust them when things go wrong. A great example of this is ear dipping and smearing boofs off of rocks. Both of these are things which fall into the realm of downriver freestyle, personal expression on easy runs, but they can also be emergency tools to pull out when you're in a position where things aren't going right. There are absolutely times where I come around the corner and there's a crisscross current on a boof or something like that, or you really need to separate off the bottom, and the ear dip is one of the best ways to do it. Well, that's never going to be your first choice as a place to learn the ear dip, right? If you need to have that skill, the best place that you could have found it is somewhere where you're already confident. Same thing for bouncing off rocks or smearing off rocks. If you're terrified of the rocks that are out there, it's going to be very difficult when you're in a bad situation. You need to have already built up a lot of that instinct of how to lean on, lift your chine so the water can slide under your boat when you are going to get forced up on a rock, or when you get forced a little offline, how to grab onto a little piece of that rock and get a nice clean smearing boof off. All of those little things that are just fun little skills along the way often can be extrapolated out into bigger versions of themselves to make awesome looking moves in different cool features, but to really pull things out in the clutch. So these are all ways that you can prepare for things going wrong. But what do you really do when it hits the fan? The best thing that I can tell you is hang on. If you've ever actually seen a truly perfect hydraulic, a low head dam, something like that, there's debris floating around in it that's been in there for days, weeks, months. Your average hole, even at the bottom of a waterfall that looks bad, probably doesn't have a bunch of debris banging around in there that's been there forever, right? So the reality is that although your adrenaline is flowing, your heart is racing, and time is in a different kind of continuum where everything seems to be taking forever, you probably have been in that hole for a second. One of the best ways to learn this lesson the hard way is to be filmed when you flip over and swim. The number of people who I teach who think that they were getting throttled in a hole when they were swimming in flat water, or think that they were under forever when their head barely got wet, is astounding. One of the best things that you can do when everything's going wrong is just try to be calm. Find your center. For myself, I can say that my inner monologue starts screaming. There are parts of me that are convinced that everything is terrible, that I need to bail. I can feel all of the adrenaline telling me to run, to escape, to get away, to swim. You have to learn how to quiet those things out. You have to learn the lesson that 99.9% of the time, you are better off in your boat. Do whatever you have to quiet those voices and just focus on rolling. The more you do that, the better everything else is going to be. Another scenario you'll see is that someone is right side up and their line isn't playing out the way they thought it was going to. That doesn't mean that you need to find another line. That means you need to dig deep and make it. 90% of the time, what you see up-and-coming paddlers do is try to find an off-ramp, trying to find an alternative, another way to do it, because something small along the way bobbled them in a way that they weren't expecting. You have to quiet the noise. You're nervous. You're overwhelmed. Your senses are probably heightened and taking in things in a way that's not accurate because you're full of adrenaline. Try to dig deep, focus on what you're doing, and just do your job. If you just do your job, everything's going to be fine. This is one of those places where sometimes wearing a GoPro really helps you. One of the things that really solidified my paddling was going back and watching those moments again with a clear head. Very often, I was convinced, wholly convinced, that I had been offline, that I had missed or been pulled away or something like that by feet, that I wasn't going to make it. And then when I go back and I watch it in its reality, because the camera isn't lying, I was maybe an inch or two offline. But my senses were so heightened by adrenaline that I was extremely prone to overreaction. It sounds oversimplified, but it really is true that most of being a honey badger, most of being resilient, is just ignoring your outside environment, focusing on your own goals and pulling through. I've said before, that doing your job in the face of adversity is the definition of courage, especially when they're scary and dangerous. And that's what paddling is. So much of why this sport is rewarding, gives personal growth, daily challenges, and is addicting as a lifestyle, is because of the courage it takes and the sense of vindication, victory, and elation on the backside. That's the dragon that we're all out there chasing together. And if you want to reach those goals, along the way, you're going to have to accept that there are going to be setbacks. So from one person on that journey to another, dig deep, get back on the horse, and clock in. I'll see you on the next one, guys.